Happy Harvest is a 2D farming game demo on the Unity Asset Store that features cozy genre gameplay and URP graphic features. This video is all about how to take the sample project and make it yours, from creating your own art assets in Blender to using UI Toolkit to make your own UI in the game. Sample projects are not only useful as examples, they provide context for a variety of things to learn because we don't have to start from scratch. This tutorial is divided into 5 chapters. In Chapter 1, we'll start with a quick game overview. Then we'll lay out existing farming crop prefabs and a prefab staging scene. In Chapter 3, we'll model a radish in Blender and render the image and secondary textures to use with Unity's Lit Sprite shader. From there, we'll create data for the new crop and plug it into the game. In Chapter 5, we'll create in-game notes with UI Toolkit. If you like learning through small practical projects you can get creative with, I think you'll really like this as an introduction. Let's start with an overview of the project. I have a blank 2D URP project, and I've used the package manager to import Happy Harvest from the Asset Store. Checking out the scenes is a good start. In Happy Harvest Scenes, there's an outdoor and indoor scene, a main menu, and a loader. Let's open up the outdoor scene first. I'll turn off the gizmos and the grid, and let's start by just playing the game and getting a feel for things. And since we're going to make a new crop in this video, I want to first look and see what a crop exactly is. From our start, we can walk a little south to the farming patch. And with the hoe selected, we can till the dirt. Selecting seed bags in the inventory, we plant seeds. We have a watering can to water with. And with the basket, we can harvest. When we're done, we can walk to the market. And clicking on the market brings up an interface where we can sell our produce. And we can buy new seeds. There's also an interface to change the weather. And some settings in the menu. Back in the editor, I'll click on one of the crops. And it looks like a crop is a numbered prefab. The prefab is in a parent object called crop that has a tile map and a tile map renderer where there are sorting options similar to a sprite renderer. All these tiles and tile maps are in a parent called grid, which has a grid component and a terrain manager that references the tile maps, including the one for the crop. Let's try and find the player and the game manager. They're not up top, though I do see our sound manager and a cycle handler up there. Let's check Don't Destroy on Load, because that's where you'll find objects that persist across scenes. And there they are. The player controller has an inventory. And the game manager is here too, which has some market entries for the seed bags we can buy. Let's start making a new crop. There's actually a guide for making crops in the manuals folder. If you double click on that, it will open a notepad. I'll open it in Visual Studio for the dark mode. For a new crop, we need a product. That'll be an apple, corn cob, radish, etc. A product is what a crop or plant produces. And the crop is the plant growing out of the ground. A seed bag is the item that the player uses to plant the crop. Make a dedicated folder for the new stuff we're going to make. I called mine Tutorial. Let's create a new blank scene specifically for dragging in instances of the existing prefabs. I'll call it Temporary Prefab Staging. Go inside the blank scene, and here we can drag in all the prefabs associated with a crop. The plants are in Happy Harvest, Art, Crops, Carrot, and Prefabs. Let's bring the prefabs in the order in which things happen for the player. So first the player has a seed bag, the seeds get planted, and then there are growth stages. I'm laying all this out because we need to make art for each one of these stages. Once a crop is harvested, we have a product, which is the carrot. This is the icon for the carrots in our inventory. And then we also have an effect when the carrot is harvested. I'll put that underneath the product. Then I'll arrange and frame things nicely for us. Okay. At this point, we want to make the artwork for the new plant. In the upcoming chapter of the video, we'll model a 3D radish in Blender, and from there, render out images for the sprites. You can skip the next chapter if you want, if you don't want a 3D model, you don't like radishes, or you want to worry about the art later. An easy thing you can do if you just want to get a new crop working is that you can go into the sprite renderers and make the color black. Maybe it's a goth carrot or something. You could also take the existing crops into Photoshop or GIMP and shift the colors around. I did that with a little fantasy plant here I call mooncorn. And as delicious as this looks, I'm going to head into Blender. So join me if you're into making the radish. Otherwise, you can skip to the next chapter if you want to stay in Unity. I'm using Blender 4.0, though it shouldn't make a difference. Let's start with setting up the camera. Select the camera, and I'll press N to open up the side panel to see the transform, and then press Alt-G and Alt-R to reset the position and rotation. Then I'll set the camera back at -10 on the Y, and rotate it 90 degrees on the X. Click on the Camera tab, and let's make the camera orthographic, because it's a better fit for Happy Harvest to have things be kind of flat. In the lower left of the screen, when the cursor changes, click and drag to create another window. This window will be fixed on the camera's view, which we'll switch to with 0 on the numpad. The rendered view is what counts here, therefore it's a good idea to always have the camera's view up as we work. Back in the camera's properties, I'll make the orthographic scale 10 as a baseline. And then in the output, let's set the resolution of our renders. The sprites in the project are 72 by 81 in resolution, 8 by 9. We can, of course, use the percentage here to double that if we want to see things a little better as we work. In our camera window, when hovering over the header, roll the mouse wheel to get over to Viewport Shading. And there, click the last option, because we want this window to be a rendered view. For now, let's configure our lighting to be flat and from the front. Delete the spotlight, and then press Shift-A to create a sun. The position doesn't matter, so I'll press G and X to move it off to the side. Let's do some neutral front lighting. I'll rotate the light RX 60 degrees. The time has come to delete the cube, and I'll start the radish off as a UV sphere. Up in the header, in the Object dropdown, select Shade Smooth. Press Tab to go into edit mode, and then press A to select all the vertices, and squish the sphere by pressing S and Z, drag the mouse, and left-click to confirm. Before we pull a radish into shape, let's add some topology to the bottom. Go to the bottom, and hover between the last two loops. Press Ctrl-R to add a loop cut here, and click to confirm. Then Alt-select the last ring, and press G twice to slide the vertices towards the bottom. And then add another loop cut in between here. I'll just do one. Now select the bottom point. I'll press 0 to go in the camera view. Then turn on proportional editing and select root fall off, because this is a root vegetable. Press G and then Z and roll the mouse wheel to change the influence of the fall off. Drag the mouse to wherever looks good to you. Change proportional editing to sharp to get more of a point on the radish. So GZ again, and then to about there. That looks pretty good. Now press X to delete this bottom point, and then Alt-select the bottom loop because we're going to extrude out a little dangly root to add some earthy personality. So that'll be EZ click, and one more EZ click. Then S to scale this to taper off a little. Turn on X-ray at the top, or you can use Alt-Z. And then I'll turn off proportional editing, and with the B box select the ring, and press GX to move it to make a little zigzag. And this is going to be so small that our open bottom will render pointy just fine as is. Where the root meets the bulb is a little too abrupt. I'll select that loop and press Ctrl V, and then Smooth Vertices. Then we can refine this in the Smooth Vertices panel. That looks better. Okay, now back into Edit mode. I'll press A to select everything, then I'll move it down to make space for our leaves. Before we move on, let's render this with F12, see how it looks. Okay, yeah, it's going to be that small. It's good to check this to not spend time on unnecessary details. We'll start the leaf as a plane, and then tab into Edit mode and rotate it 90 degrees on the X. And now let's go to the Wrench tab and add some modifiers. We'll start with a mirror. And I was a little surprised by this menu coming from Blender 3.6 to 4. Mirror is in Generate. Since we're using the mirror modifier, I want to do a loop cut down the middle and delete the other side. I'll also turn on clipping so the verts stop at the middle. And then let's add a solidify modifier, which will give some thickness to our leaves if we turn it up. To get a more organic shape from our simpler mesh, we'll add a subdivision surface modifier, which will give us a bit of a plastic rounded look, but we'll change that once we have the shape right. I'm going to bring this up because it's the top lobe of the leaf. Then I'll do one loop cut down the center, and the middle edge we can extrude down, and then bring the outside in. Then we can extrude two smaller lobes underneath the big one. And really, this is the basic shape, so it all comes down to fussing with it from here, moving the points around, sometimes with proportional fall-off, and adding loop cuts where you need them. Oh, and one thing that I forgot to do is, in object mode, let's make this leaf have smooth shading. And we can also bump up the subdivisions. Alright, and then I'm messing with it probably far more than I need to. Basically, I'll get the shape pretty good with the mirror modifier, and at some point I'll apply the mirror and turn on mirroring and topology mirror in the tool here in options. Then you can scale and pull on the whole mesh with the proportional fall off and kind of modify the shape. Next, let's add some color in the materials tab. Click new material. And then you might want to look and see what the green colors are with a color picker in Happy Harvest so that things go well together. I'll do the same thing with the radish. And then we can change our viewport shading to rendered. If we want a flatter but still rounded look, we can apply the solidify modifier. In edit mode, turn off any mirroring, and on the sides, give it a loop cut or two. And then, of course, we can grab a side and slide it if we want it to be less rounded. But actually, I'm going to undo this and save it for a final step because it's a lot easier to shape the flat mesh, and we have a couple other leaves to make. So go all the way back to where we have the solidify modifier again. Next, let's change the pivot point so we can rotate the leaf to the side. I'll go to the bottom, turn on X-ray, select these bottom points, and press Shift S and cursor to selected. Then in object mode, press W and do set origin to 3D cursor. Now with R and Y, we can rotate this leaf. Slight modification here of the leaf shape. It's a pretty tight fit with the leaves on the side, so it works best if the leaf is wedge-shaped. Shift D to duplicate the leaf. And then in edit mode, before we rotate the leaf, make the transform pivot point be the 3D cursor. And if you rotate RY and that happens, it's because your mirroring is still on. I'll go into Tool and turn that off. It's kind of big to just rotate it. Let's scale it down first. Rather than rotate this all the way, instead I want to rotate it just a little bit and then select the top point and rotate it with proportional editing on with a large fall off. So it's just a slight bend to the leaf. I don't want to warp it too much. If you want to avoid that, you can select more of the leaf, pressing C with the brush select, and you won't get any warping from the points you have selected. And yeah, this can be kind of tricky. Let's add a mirror modifier to get a leaf on the other side. And then on the mirror modifier, we don't want to merge the meshes at all. We want to keep the two leaves separate. And sometimes I switch the transform pivot, like for getting the bend at the bottom of the leaf there. Then switch back to 3D cursor to rotate the leaves again. And of course, F12 to check the render. We can better fit this to the render window, so I'll hold Shift and select everything, and then just scale it up with S. And then I want to get the radish origin point to be on the geometry. W, set origin to geometry. And then Shift S and cursor to selected, because for the dirt, I want to use a meta ball. And then this is something that we can just kind of clump up and put around the radish for the growth stages. In edit mode, we can select the red or green handle and move the ball around, and then press Shift D to make a new one. And then we can scale it and get all of this around the plant. Don't fuss with it too much, because what we can do is in object mode, press W, and then you can convert this to a mesh. And then let's get this mesh a little bit better sorted. I'll go into remesh. Smooth or sharp doesn't matter too much for this. And of course, there's better paid tools for this kind of thing, like Quad Remesher. Apply this. Okay, and then let's use the decimate modifier. Bring down the ratio a little bit, and then apply this. And now we have the mesh in a better place where we can sculpt or just shape it with the proportional edit tool. And let's get smooth shading on this too. F12, let's check out the render. And you can certainly start using these images. For that, we'll want to turn on transparency, which is in the render tab under film. That's where the little checkbox is. F12 again, and then you can save this with image, save. Now let's create a quick normal map for the lit sprite material. And we'll be covering this extensively in a future dedicated video on secondary textures. First, I'll hide the dirt, go up to the header, and switch to the solid viewport shading. Click on the viewport shading dropdown. From there, switch to matte cap. Matte cap is short for material capture, and it's a low-cost material simulation that maps a pre-rendered sphere onto our object. Switch the matte cap material to this colorful one that looks like a normal map. Then in the viewport, we want the background to be a neutral normal map color, equal parts red and green for no directional change on the X and Y, and the blue channel all the way up, meaning the normal is pointed straight forward, perpendicular to the texture plane. Rather than try and get there with these normalized color values, go to the hexadecimal and put in 8080FF, which is exactly the RGB value of 128, 128, 255. We're going to render our viewport, which means that our pivot point and 3D cursor will render too. Turn these off by toggling off display overviews in the header. It's the icon with the two little circles there. Pressing F12 is how we've been rendering our image, but what we actually want is up in the view dropdown, we want viewport render image. And we see that we have transparency still turned on. Let's turn that off. Go back up there, view, render image, and then our colors don't look right. They're desaturated. That's because Blender 4 defaults to a new color management setting where the tone mapping desaturates colors in a filmic way. It's called AGX. Turn that to standard, and then try rendering the image again. View, viewport render image. And that's exactly what we're seeing. So go to image and save. If we don't use any secondary textures, the normal map or a mask map, our asset will look out of place given that Happy Harvest uses these advanced lighting features. Back in Blender, turn on the dirt clump, Then viewport render image, and save this render in Unity as sprite underscore radish underscore normal underscore 3, since this will be for the final growth stage. Let's switch to the rendered view because now we're going to create a mask map which uses the red channel for where on the sprite both lights and 2D light blend styles can affect the sprite. For example, here's the mask map for the carrot. The red areas result in creating a rim lighting or Fresnel effect, which helps to define the asset against the background. We can easily create this in Blender, and it's similar to how we can also create some stylized toon shading. Let's start by closing the side window. So go down to the corner and click and drag to collapse it. Then drag out a bottom window. And in the top left, make this window a shader editor. Go into the Materials tab and create a new material and call this one Mask Map. And then you can remove the other material with the minus. And then on the other parts of the radish, you can just switch the material to the mask map material. In the shader editor, I'll move the principal shader node over and press Shift-A and search for shader to RGB. And then you can just drop this node on the noodle to connect it up. And then get a color ramp node. This allows us to have control of the color and values of the material shading by dragging these handles around. And we can change the color of the handles or color stops by clicking on the bottom swatch. We'll change one of the colors to pure red and the other to black. Then you can move the handles around to get the kind of mask that you want to have. Then creating our mask map is just a matter of arranging our lighting such that we get the rim lighting effect that we're looking for. Sometimes you can just use the sun for this, have it face the model head on, and have a flip setup where the shaded areas will be rim lit. But to achieve the rim lighting in Happy Harvest, we can have some more control by creating 2 spotlights. And then we can arrange them such that they shine on opposing sides of the model. I'll Shift-D duplicate the spotlight and RZ 180 to flip it around. Then I'll hold Control and move it on the X so it's mirrored on the other side. And then we can go back into the color ramp and refine things. In the Light tab for each spotlight, I'll turn off Shadow because we want the lighting to cleanly emphasize the shape of the object. From here, we can grab both the spotlights and adjust them so they cover the whole model. We're ready to render out this mask map. So let's go into the Render tab here and then turn on Transparency. Press F12 to render it. Then Image, save it in your Unity project as Sprite Radish Mask 3. Then I'm going to go through and name my objects better because we're going to start making the other growth stages for the radish. Now let's switch the materials back to the original materials so we can render out the regular sprite. We're going to use the same color ramp technique to do some stylized shading. Once again, we'll need a shader to RGB node and a color ramp node. And you'll want to sample the original color with both of the handles, and then you can make one dark and the other brighter. Then I'll copy these 2 nodes and paste them into the other materials. After you've sampled the color, go into the original base color and make it white, so you can get the full range of values for the color ramp. The default value for the base color is 0.8. You can also change the interpolation between the color stops. You can change the roughness of the material and the rotation of the light, as well as adding other lights if you like. Now's a good time to refer back to the original art so we can come close to how it looks. The lighting is coming from the front and above. I'll go back and redo that to how I had it, and then I'll add some warmth to the highlights and bring the roughness up. Let's F12 render this out, And then in Unity, set up the secondary textures and just see how it looks. Save this as sprite underscore radish underscore 03. I already have one of those from my planning. I'll move all that stuff out of the way. In Unity now, select the normal map we rendered out and set it to be of texture type normal map. Then scroll down and click apply. Now select the regular radish sprite and go to Sprite Editor. In the Sprite Editor, go to the top left dropdown and select Secondary Textures. And then add 2. In the Name dropdown, you can select what kind of secondary texture it is. For the first one, I'll select Normal Map, and then look for the normal map for the radish. That will be Sprite Radish Normal 3 for the last growth stage. And then the second secondary texture will be the mask texture. Type radish again, and there it is, mask 3. Then click apply. And now let's check this out. Take the sprite and drag it into the scene, and it's twice as big as the other carrots because we did that 200% on the render. Let's bring in a Spotlight 2D. The lighting fall off on the sprite looks nice, but we aren't seeing our normal map yet. We need to turn on normal maps on the light, where there are some quality options and a Z distance that we can set. It's pretty subtle right now, but if we bring the light closer to the sprite, we'll see more of our normal map giving shape to the sprite texture. Now let's turn this off so we can check out our mask map. In blending, change the blend style of the light to multiply with mask R for red. And now our mask map enables rim lighting on the sprite. We've rendered this out at double resolution. If we scale it down by half, it's at the same scale as the carrot. In Blender now, it's easy to bring in artwork for reference or matching colors because you can just drag images into the 3D viewport from your folders. I'm going to sample the colors on the existing artwork. I could also use the reference to sculpt some more detail to the dirt. I'll render this as the final growth stage, and then I'll time-lapse my work on the other growth stages, starting with the first, which is just a hole in the ground. For the hole in the dirt, I'm going to make a new material, copy-paste the dirt material, and then I'll just make the brown a little bit darker. This darker material will be applied to the faces of the hole. I'll then render and save this as Sprite Radish 00 for the first growth stage. Then I'll do the normal map, which is set up and ready to go in the solid viewport shading. Then I'll do the mask texture, switching to the mask map material and switching the lighting to the mask dual side lighting. By the way, you can add as many mask lights as you like. At this point, I'll create an empty parent object and child the radish parts to it. That way I can duplicate the radish to create the other growth stages and keep each one. The second growth stage will have tiny leaves coming out of the dirt. And then there's our mask and normal map. And then in the third growth stage, we can start from the last growth stage and then just scale it down a bit. And then, of course, the normal map and mask for this one. Back in Unity, I already set up all the secondary textures in the sprite editor. Let's take a look at how the growth stages look next to the carrots. And yeah, I think those look good. I think the dirt could probably use some more detail, but it's fine for now. In Unity, I have all the radish art I previously created. I also did a radish version of the seed bag in Photoshop. If you don't want to do that, just put a paint color on the sprite renderer of the existing art. Let's start switching the carrots to the radishes. I'm going to rename everything, switch out all the sprites, and then drag all this into our project folder to make prefab variants at the end. In addition to scaling down the sprites, I'm going to check the offset of the carrot so I can match it on the radish. It looks like the carrot has a custom pivot of 0.5 and 0.32. I'll make the same custom pivot for all the radishes. I'll try it with one first. And that looks right, so let's do it for the others. Then I'll go back to switching out the sprites and renaming what will be the radish prefabs. And the radish harvest effect will need the sprite radish icon. I'll select everything and then drag it into the radish folder. And then I'll select prefab variant. Before we move on to the crop data, let's put all of this in a prefab folder. Let's do the same thing with all the art, put all of it into a art folder. Let's bring up Windows for all the existing caret data, then we can use that as a guide for the scriptable objects for the radish. The data is in the data folder, and let's start with crops. Right-click on the caret crop and then select Properties, which gives us a dedicated inspector-like window for the caret crop data. Do the same in the Items folder, where you'll find the caret seed bag. Right-click, Properties. I'll put those two next to each other. And then Products for the caret product itself. There we go. Now let's create the scriptable objects for each of these for the radish. I'll go into the tutorial folder into radish, right-click in the folder, go to Create, and in 2D farming, we'll create a crop, and in item, create a product and a seed bag. I'll go through and create each of these. There's the crop, need a seed bag, and a product. Let's start filling in the radish crop. First, I'm going to rename all of the radish scriptable objects. Let's start with the crop data. Following the formatting of the caret, I'll make the unique ID radish_crop, and then I'll bring in the product, and I'll make it so it grows pretty fast and that it doesn't die if we don't water it, just so we can test it for now. For the effect, bring in the prefab of the VFX for the radish. Now let's check out the caret rule tile and see what exactly that is. The rule tile just references our growth stage prefabs. Let's set that up for the radish then. Right-click in the project folder, Create, 2D, Tiles, and Rule Tile. And we'll follow the caret's name formatting with tile_radish_01. We'll go through and duplicate 3 more of these. In each rule tile, put in the corresponding growth stage prefab. Back in the radish crop, add 4 growth stages and drag in each of the radish rule tiles. That's everything for the radish crop. Let's move on to the seed bag. In the seed bag, similar to before, let's change the unique ID and now put in a display name. Then let's find our seed bag sprite, the visual prefab of the seed bag, and then we'll use the same animator trigger and sound, and then bring in the radish crop data. Oh, and let's put in a cheap price to make things easy to test. Finally, we have the product of the crop, which we can buy or sell. We'll need the icon for the sprite, and for the visual prefab, go to Assets, not in Scene, or else you'll get a type mismatch. I'm thinking that eating a radish sounds like eating an apple, so we'll use the same sound effect. And lastly, I'll make the sell price 10. I'll close up all these caret windows, and then let's plug our data into the game. Let's go into the outdoor scene. In Scenes, Farm Outdoor. In the outdoor scene, let's give the character some of these radish seeds. And there's where we want to drop or find the radish seed bag. Okay, and then I'll just put a count of 10 like the others. And now let's put some of these radish seeds on the market. To do that, we'll need to go to the Game Manager, and the Game Manager is in the Resources folder. Here's the market and market entries. Let's make an entry for the radish seed bag. After we have the radish seed bag in there, that's all we need to do. We can press play and try this out. All right, the radish seed bag is in our inventory. It's a good start. Let's try tilling the ground. And then we can plant the radish seeds. And yeah, I think the dirt should be rotated more for the top view, but that's okay. That's why we bring it in and look at it and then make changes. All right, and the radishes are growing. Now let's try the harvesting. Okay, let's try the radishes. Okay, that works. Let's go to the market. And at the market, we can sell, keep an eye on the coins. Let's sell the radish, and we can sell a carrot. And then we can buy more radish seeds. So that's our new crop. Even though the video is getting long, I think we should do an interactive note using a little bit of UI Toolkit, because then we have some context for the player when they start the game and they're in this room. Let's switch scenes to the interior of the farmer's room. In scenes, double-click on House Interior. And then I want to organize all the radish stuff away. To create the note message, we need a UI Builder window. So go to Window, UI Toolkit, and UI Builder. If it's your first time looking at this, a couple of these panels will be familiar, like the hierarchy. Only here we see something different. It says unsaved file. And I don't know about you, but anything unsaved makes me anxious. So go to File, Save As, and save this as Interactive Note. And this will be a UXML file. U stands for Unity, and the rest is Extensible Markup Language. Markup refers to data formatting, like how data should be structured and presented. Same as the M or ML and HTML, Hypertext Markup Language. Let's get the canvas looking more like our game window. Select it, and on the right we have some canvas size options, like Match Game Window. Or we could just put in the size that we want, which I'm going to do for 1920 by 1080. In the lower left, we have some standard library elements. Bring in a visual element, and we can use this as the parent and background of the other elements, since in UI Toolkit, child elements appear on top of parent elements. In the inspector at the top, call this Note Element. Below, we have a bunch of inline styles. Let's get a feel for these by making a background color. Go to Background, click on the color swatch, bring up the opacity to 100, and then pick a color for your note. And then in size, we can resize this to be a percentage of the canvas. Click next to Auto and switch it to % for both width and height. And I'll make width 33 and height 20%. To better see this, I'll set a percentage for the max as well and make it the same, 33 and 20. Now let's align the box. The first two have to do with child elements, so go to Align Self and put that centered. Let's bring the position down from the top, go into Position, and then let's change it from Auto to Percentage, and make this 33%. Now, if you've noticed, just like with prefabs, the values that we change here, they get bold, which means that we're overriding a style. Let's create a style sheet for all notes in the game, not just from this letter. Click the plus by Style Sheets, and then select Create New USS, Unity Style Sheet, and then save this as Interactive Note. Now, personally, I never did much web development, so interpreting some of this stuff in the UI builder makes me feel like I'm trying to understand a culture that borrowed from a lost civilization or something, but in the top left where it says New Selector, that is a style selector. Click there, and then we have a pop-up guide for creating style selectors. Even though these examples are in camel case, the project uses kebab case, which is lowercase with hyphens in between the words. This is the naming convention in CSS. In Note Panel, let's change the background color here in the inspector like we did with the visual element. So I'll bring up the alpha and change the color to an off-white in order to see the change. Then we can just grab the selector style class and drop it on our Note element. Nothing has changed, and the reason for that is because our inline styles in the Note element override our style rules. So to fix this, Go to Color in the Note element, and on the left side, right-click and select Unset. And now we see our style rule at work. Next, go back to the Note panel and change the color back to a Note color. And from here, we can set up other things about our note that can then be applied to other kinds of in-game notes. The only other thing I want to add here on the Note panel is a border outline and a radius to make the rectangle rounded. From here, let's set up the note text and a button to close the note. From the Elements library, scroll down and drag in 2 labels and a button. Let's rename these elements. The first will be Note Header, the second, Note Text, and the button, Close Button. Then we can go up to the Note Panel Style class, and in Align, we can decide how the child element should be arranged. I'd like even spacing around each element, and they should be center aligned. Then let's make some style selectors for the Note Header, the Note Text, and the Close Button. Then drag these style classes to their appropriate elements. In the Note Header and Note Text, I want to change the font. So first I'll delete the font assets, which are similar to TextMesh Pro assets, and they allow us to create variations of the same font. But I want to move us along here, so we'll just use the regular font for the font called Curse. Okay, and for the header, I just want to change the color a little bit so that we know it's like a title of the note rather than a part of the note itself. And then in the Note Header element, I'll change the text to read Note Header. Then in the Note Text element, we can write a sentence, since this will be longer, like, this is the note text. It should be around 2 sentences from Grandpa. And then in the Note Text style selector, we'll change the font, delete the font asset, change the font to Curse Casual again, and change the size, and then have the text wrap around. Not sure why it didn't wrap around at first. Interesting. And then let's do a margin. So you can do all the margins there, but we only want a margin on the right. And I think 10 or 12 is a little small. I'll do 20 on the right and 20 on the left. All right. I think that's everything for this. Yeah, so let's move on to the button. The font this time, let's make it Roboto. Kind of a classic for interfaces. And I'll make it bold. And then let's make the color of the text white. And then in background, we can change the color of the button to be red. And I'll make it a little less saturated. Okay. And let's make the button text a little bit larger. All right. That looks pretty good. Then let's change the actual text to close. And the button, I'll go back to the style and make it so that it's aligned to the right. And then we need a margin here. So I'll do 20 on the right. And then on the bottom, make it a little bit less at maybe 16. And actually looking at this now, I want to make the note header color be a little bit more like the border outline. So it's black with some transparency. So the color of the note background comes through. Yeah, I think that looks a little better. I think we're in a good place to get this note working in-game. Let's save it. In the hierarchy, right-click and go to UI Toolkit, UI Document. And then rename the game object to Interactive Note. Then drag the Interactive Note UXML file or visual tree asset to Source Asset. Okay, great. Now create a new C# script and call it Interactive Note. And drag your script to the Note game object. We're going to keep this pretty simple. Let's switch to Scene View. And inside the note, right-click and make a 2D object. That's a sprite square. This will be the letter graphic. And actually, I'll give it a more generic name since maybe we'll make a prefab of this. And now we need to change the layer so we can see the graphic. And we want to make it on top of the chair, so I'll change the layer to Objects. On layer 0, it fights with the chair. Change the order to 1. It'll fix that. And then I'll make the letter more letter-like and rotate it a little bit. On interactive note, I'll add a box collider. Might be better to have this on the note so it can be rotated too, but like I said, we're just keeping it simple. Then let's go into the note script and figure out how to program simple interactivity with UI Toolkit. I think it'll be easiest to have it all up on the screen for you to copy. Our interactive note class extends Happy Harvest's interactive object, implementing the abstract method interacted with, which we can override with whatever we want to happen on click. In order to use interactive object, we import the Happy Harvest namespace, and we also need unityengine.ui elements to use UI Toolkit stuff. Next, we define private fields for the note's heading and text using serialized field to set the text in the inspector. For the note, we use the text area attribute to have more text area for typing out the note's content. Additionally, we declare a visual element and a button for our close button. Within onEnable, we initialize the note element by querying the UI document's root visual element for the specific visual element we previously created, named note element, and we set that invisible. The child elements we made, the close button, note text, and heading, we also locate and set the text on. While I was making the video, I actually made a mistake here. Rather than having note header, I had note heading, which we don't have a note heading, it's called note header. So that's where these strings can be really tricky. Then we set up an event listener for a close note method to listen to the close button's click event. The overridden interacted with method, when invoked, makes the note element visible, and we log a message to the console. The close note method, triggered by the close button, hides the note element, effectively closing the note. And last, we use onDisable to unsubscribe from the close button's click event, which allows the subscription memory to be reclaimed when the note is no longer needed. Bad things happen when stuff sticks around in memory that isn't being used. Back in the editor, let's give the note heading and note text some text. I'll press play, and at the bottom there's a little error unrelated to what we're doing. And if we click on the note, we get a note. Okay, we see the problem that I talked about earlier where we aren't seeing the note header text change because my string for the query was heading and not header, which is what it needs to be. And we see that Grandpa, being quite frugal, has squished the writing to conserve paper space. But you can go into the UI builder and adjust things. So I'm adjusting the margins of the text. The console will complain about it, but when you save in the UI builder, your changes will be kept. After I fixed my script and restarted the game, there we go. Note from Grandpa on the header, and things are spaced better because I adjusted the size of the panel. We'll throw up some other videos at the end of this video, some links below if you're curious to learn more about the 2D art features of the Happy Harvest project related to lighting, shadows, special effects, and tile maps. But that's it for now. Y'all come back now, you hear?